Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you new science fiction stories, a new world, a new adventure. And yes, there is no robotic or AI voices here, only real human voices with real human touch. So let's start this journey, and please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's have a story. Okay.
They came to our world expecting sheep. What they found was a woman who'd spent her childhood learning which creatures bite back and which ones just run. The predators of 17 star systems would learn the difference soon enough. The prey animals already knew. The gathering hall smelled like burnt metal and something organic that Dr. Sarah Venn couldn't quite place. Decomposing flowers, maybe. Or fear processed through alien biochemistry. She stood at the back. Always the back. The delegation from Earth, all 12 of them, had been assigned the smallest alcove in the circular chamber, wedged between the methane collective and what appeared to be sentient crystalline formations that hummed at frequencies that made her teeth ache. The Cathara weren't even pretending to acknowledge them. Sarah watched the lead ambassador, Takar, a scales like hammered bronze, jaw that could probably crack titanium. Gesture with his primary manipulators, while his secondaries made complex signs that the translation matrix struggled to interpret. The delegates from the core worlds leaned forward. Interested. Engaged. Earth's position at the Galactic Congress had been very carefully explained to them during the 3-month journey. Petitioner status. Observer privileges only. No voting rights. No territorial claims. No military presence beyond defensive stations. No teeth. They're discussing the Viridian Straits again, whispered Marcus Chen, their actual diplomat, the one who'd spent 40 years learning to smile while being condescended to. Third time this cycle. Sarah nodded, didn't speak. The Straits were a shipping corridor that 17 species wanted exclusive rights to. And Earth wasn't one of them. Earth wanted a seat at the table. Earth wanted to be taken seriously. Earth might as well have wanted to flap its arms and fly to Andromeda. The Cathara ambassador's voice carried across the chamber, translated into human standard with that peculiar lag that made everyone sound vaguely threatening. The mammals of the Orion Spur persist in their delusion that technological achievement grants them status among the ascended races. Scattered sounds that the Matrix interpreted as laughter. Sarah's jaw tightened. She counted to 5, then 10. Then she stopped counting because Marcus's hand had appeared on her forearm, fingers pressing just hard enough to hurt. Not yet, he breathed. When, then? When we have leverage. Leverage, right? Earth had sent them with survey data on 14 unclaimed systems and 3 technological innovations that the Galactic Patent Authority had classified as quaint, and a desperate hope that someone, somewhere in this Baroque nightmare of interstellar politics, would see them as something other than amusing newcomers. The session continued for 6 hours. Sarah's legs went numb somewhere around hour 3. The crystalline beings shifted through 7 distinct color configurations. The methane collective released gas in patterns that apparently constituted voting. Earth's delegation stood in their alcove and watched history happen around them. When the session finally ended, the chamber emptied in order of precedence. The Cathara first, naturally, apex predators of the core would reach, masters of 17 systems, builders of the first stable wormhole network. Then the collective, the crystallines, is the Vex Dominion, the harmonics. 43 delegations filed out before Marcus led their group toward the exit. Sarah lingered. The chamber was vast, built for species that ranged from human-sized to truly enormous. The walls were living material, engineered organisms that shifted color with the emotional temperature of the room. Right now, they pulsed a sickly yellow-green. Disappointment, according to the cultural briefing packet. She walked to where the Cathara delegation had stood. The floor there was different, scored, marked by claws. Dr. Venn. She turned. The speaker was small, maybe 4 feet tall, covered in something between fur and feathers, with 6 limbs and eyes that tracked independently. A Kelon, if she remembered the species briefs correctly, one of the older races, and pre-wormhole civilization that had somehow survived first contact with the Cathara and maintained independence through sheer institutional stubbornness. Ambassador? Sarah's memory hitched. Velshara? Close enough? The Quelon's translator rendered their voice as pleasant, almost musical. You watched the entire proceeding? Yes. Most petitioner species send observers for an hour, maybe 2. You stood for 6. Sarah shrugged. I wanted to understand how it works. And do you? I understand that we're prey animals in a room full of predators, and the predators are bored with us already. The Quelon made a sound like wind through grass. Laughter, maybe. The Cathara are predators, yes, but not all predators hunt the same way. Some chase, some ambush. Those independent eyes focused on her simultaneously. Some starve their quarry and wait for weakness. Encouraging. I watched you watch them. You weren't looking at the speakers, you were looking at the secondaries, the ones making the hand signs. Sarah said nothing. Those signs aren't translated for petitioner species. The briefing materials don't include them. But you were trying to read them anyway. Old habit. I study animal behavior. Humans are animals. Everything's an animal, Ambassador. We just forget it when we build cities and starships. Velshara's feathers ruffled. The Cathara consider your species uncomplicated, reactive, emotional in ways they find distasteful. They believe you will make noise for another cycle or 2 and then accept your peripheral status. And what do you believe? I believe, the Quelon said carefully, that you should visit the menagerie before you make any final judgments about your place in this Congress. The what? But Velshara was already moving toward the exit, 6 limbs carrying them with surprising speed. Habitat Ring 7. Restricted access, but I'll transmit credentials to your delegation. Go alone. Tell no one. Then they were gone. Sarah stood in the empty chamber, the walls shifting toward grey-blue, confusion, uncertainty, and wondered what the hell she'd just been recruited for. The delegation quarters were nice enough. Sterile. Everything built to universal standard, which meant nothing quite fit human proportions. The beds were too short. The chairs distributed weight in ways that made her spine ache. The air tasted recycled in a way that spoke of filtration systems designed for beings with different metabolic requirements. Marcus was in the common area reviewing the day's recordings. He looked exhausted. Productive day, Sarah said. He didn't look up. They mentioned us once. Did you catch it? Hour 4, right after the harmonics proposed their amendment. Takar said even the peripheral species should have opportunity to observe democratic process. We made the official record. Progress. Sarah. Marcus finally met her eyes. I've been doing this for 40 years. First with the Chinese Diplomatic Corps, then with the combined Earth delegation. I know what a losing position looks like. She sat in one of the 2 tall chairs, feet dangling like a child's. So we lose. So we adapt. We find a niche. Humanity becomes the species that doesn't threaten anyone, that facilitates agreements, that provides neutral ground for negotiations. The prey species. The survivor species. Sarah thought about that. About humanity's long, bloody history of surviving things that should have killed them. Ice ages, plagues, themselves. I'm going out tomorrow, she said. Personal time. There's an ecological preserve I want to see. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Personal time was one of the few privileges they actually had. Habitat Ring 7 was on the far side of the station. Sarah took 3 different transit pods to reach it, each one traveling through sections of the station that grew progressively stranger. The Corps delegations had quarters near the Congress chamber, massive, ornate, and built from materials that probably cost more than Earth's entire GDP. The peripheral species were scattered throughout the middle rings. Ring 7 was something else entirely. The transit pod opened onto a platform that overlooked what appeared to be a carefully maintained wilderness. Not garden, not park. Wilderness. Trees, or things like trees, stretched toward a sky ceiling that projected what might have been someone's homeworld. Clouds. Genuine clouds, unless she was very wrong about the condensation patterns. The air smelled alive. A small kiosk near the entrance featured a holographic attendant that cycled through several species before settling on a vaguely humanoid form. "Credentials, please." Sarah transmitted Velshara's access codes. Dr. Sarah Venn, Xenobiology and Animal Behavior, Earth Delegation. You are cleared for unescorted observation. Please remain on marked paths. Do not disturb the inhabitants. Emergency recall is available via your personal comm. Inhabitants? But the hologram had already dissolved. Sarah stepped through the entrance field and into the preserve. It was bigger than it looked. Much bigger. The habitat extended in directions that shouldn't have been possible given the station's published dimensions, which meant either she was wrong about the architecture or they were using spatial folding technology that Earth's physicists would murder to examine. The path wound through terrain that shifted every 100 meters. Forest gave way to something like grassland, which transitioned into rocky highlands. The temperature changed with each zone. The light shifted. It was like walking through a dozen different planets compressed into a single space. She saw her first creature after maybe 20 minutes of walking. It was small, rabbit-sized, with 6 legs and fur that shifted colors to match the vegetation. It watched her from the cover of something resembling a fern, eyes wide and unblinking. Prey animal. Sarah froze, held perfectly still, watched. The creature's ears, 3 of them, swiveled independently. Its breathing was rapid, nervous, but it didn't run. After a long moment, it emerged from cover, hopped closer, sniffed the air between them. Then it did something strange. It lowered its body, flattened against the ground. Not in fear. Sarah had seen enough frightened animals to know the difference. This was submission, deference, to her. "What the hell?" she whispered. The creature bolted. Sarah stood there, trying to process what she'd just witnessed, when something much larger moved through the trees to her left. This one wasn't small. It stood maybe 7 feet tall at the shoulder, built like something between a bear and a big cat, with muscle that moved under sleek fur like water over stone. Predator, apex, the kind of animal that human ancestors learned to fear before they learned language. It emerged onto the path 30 feet ahead of her. Sarah's body went into threat assessment mode without conscious thought. Exit routes. Weapons, none. Cover, inadequate. Fight or flight, neither. She stood still, maintained eye contact, but not challenged stare. Relaxed her shoulders, breathed. The predator approached. Every instinct Sarah had cultivated over 15 years of fieldwork screamed at her to move, run, climb. Something. But she'd learned long ago that prey runs. Predators chase. The hierarchy isn't about size or strength. It's about who decides when the chase begins. The creature stopped 5 feet away. This close, she could see details. Scars across its flank. Eyes that tracked with disconcerting intelligence. Breathing that was perfectly controlled. It was evaluating her. Sarah didn't move. The predator circled. Once, twice. She could feel the weight of its attention, the calculation happening behind those eyes. Then it did the same thing the rabbit creature had done. Lowered itself. Not all the way, it wasn't prey, but enough. Head down. Eyes averted. Recognition. When it moved away, it gave her space. Wide berth. The kind of distance that dominant pack animals enforce. Sarah's hands were shaking. She sat on a nearby rock and tried to understand what had just happened. The preserve was full of animals. She saw dozens more over the next 2 hours. Prey species, predators, things that might have been scavengers. Every single one of them reacted the same way when they saw her. Deference, not fear, not curiosity. Deference. Like they knew something she didn't. Velshara found her near the exit, sitting on a bench, watching the artificial sunset turn the habitat ceiling gold and purple. You stayed longer than I expected, the Quellan said. I'm trying to understand what I just saw. And I think you brought me here to make a point. Velshara settled onto the bench with that peculiar grace that six-limbed species seem to master. As the menagerie was built by the first Accord, the species who established this Congress 8,000 years ago. They're gone now, extinct, ascended, or simply lost interest. But they left this place as a reminder. Reminder of what? That intelligence changes everything, but instinct runs deeper. Sarah waited. Those animals recognize something in you, Dr. Venn. Something that predates language or technology or starships. They see what you are, which is apex. The word hung in the air between them. Humans don't look like apex predators, Sarah said. We're not the biggest, fastest, strongest. Every species in that Congress chamber could kill me with one hand. Paw, manipulator, whatever. Velshara's eyes tracked a small flying creature passing overhead. Physical dominance is one form of apex behavior, but it's not the only form. The animals here respond to something else. Something older. I'm listening. Humans are pursuit predators, yes? You don't ambush. You don't overpower. You chase. You track. You outlast. Persistence hunting, yes. Every prey animal knows that walk. That patience. The predator that doesn't rush because it knows the prey will eventually collapse. The Cathara kill quickly. They overwhelm. They dominate. But you? Velshara made that wind through grass sound again. You would follow them across continents if you had to. Follow them until their hearts gave out from running. The prey animals here recognize that walk. That stillness that isn't rest, just waiting. Sarah thought about marathons. About humans who ran for days, chasing antelope across savannas until the antelope's bodies cooked from the inside. And about tribes that hunted by simply walking toward prey until the prey understood it would never be allowed to stop. The Cathara think we're weak, she said. The Cathara have never been hunted by something that refuses to stop. They don't understand endurance. They understand dominance, hierarchy, territory. But endurance? Velshara's feathers ruffled. That's a different kind of apex behavior, one that doesn't announce itself. You brought me here to tell me that? I brought you here to show you what you already know. That political theater in the Congress chamber, its dominance display, scales and claws and voices that rattle windows. But dominance only works if everyone agrees to play the same game. Sarah stood. Her legs had that pleasant ache that comes from hours of walking. So what game should we be playing? The long one. Velshara rose and headed for the exit. At the threshold, they paused. The Cathara will test your delegation soon. They always do. They'll propose something that seems reasonable. Trade rights, cultural exchange, some minor concession. If you accept, you confirm their assessment that you're peripheral, harmless. And if we don't accept, then you'll need to be prepared for the kind of test that apex predators give to creatures they can't quite categorize. The Kellon disappeared through the exit field. Sarah stood alone in the menagerie, watching the artificial night descend. Somewhere in the manufactured darkness, she heard the call of a hunting bird, the response of something running, the eternal conversation between predator and prey. She'd spent her whole life studying that conversation. Now she was going to have to speak it fluently enough to convince 17 star systems that humanity knew which side of the equation they belonged on. The prey animals already knew. Time to teach the predators. The test came 3 days later, wrapped in diplomatic language and delivered by a Cathara junior functionary who probably outranked everyone on Earth. Sarah was in the delegation's research alcove, reviewing behavioral data she'd compiled from 17 different species interactions in the Congress chamber when Marcus appeared in the doorway. His face had that particular shade of grey that diplomats get when they're about to deliver bad news while maintaining professional composure. They want our atmospheric processes, he said. She looked up from her workstation. Which ones? The nitrogen cycle converters. The ones we spent 8 years developing for Mars terraforming. Those aren't even fully tested yet. They don't care. Takar's delegation has submitted a formal request through the Technology Exchange Protocol. They're offering us expanded observer status in the Resource Allocation Committee. Sarah set down her stylus. Let me understand this. They want our prototype processors, the ones that could actually make Mars habitable. And in exchange, we get to watch them divide up resources we'll never be allowed to touch. It's a foot in the door. It's a mugging, dressed up as networking. Marcus moved into the room and closed the door. Privacy fields activated automatically, distorting the walls into something that looked like flowing water. Sarah, listen to me. This is exactly the kind of opportunity the Council hoped we'd find. The Cathara are the single most influential species in the core worlds. If we can establish a working relationship, they're testing us. Of course they're testing us. That's what first contact protocols are for. Building trust, demonstrating good faith. No. Sarah pulled up the data she'd been working on. I mean, they're testing us the way a predator tests prey. Watching how we respond to pressure, looking for weakness. Marcus studied the screen. It showed movement patterns from the last congressional session, color-coded by species, tracked in 3 dimensions through the chamber. You've been watching them walk around the room. I've been watching how they position themselves. Look at the Cathara. They never turn their backs on the primary exits. They maintain sight lines to every other major delegation. When the Harmonics proposed their water rights amendment, watch what happened. She played the recording. The Cathara delegation, all 7 of them, shifted position simultaneously. Not obviously, just a few steps, enough to place themselves between the Harmonics and the chamber's central podium. Cutting off approach vectors, Sarah said. It's territorial behavior. They were signaling ownership of the conversation before the Harmonics even finished speaking. That's standard political maneuvering. No, that's predator behavior, territory establishment. And watch this. She pulled up another clip, this one from the trade discussion. The Methane Collective proposes expansion rights. The Cathara don't object. They don't even acknowledge it. But look at Takar's secondaries. The smaller Cathara around the ambassador had moved closer together. Tighter formation. Defensive posture masked as casual regrouping. The Methane Collective scares them, Sarah said. Not politically, physically, instinctively. Those are chemical-based life forms that could probably dissolve Cathara chitin if they wanted to. The Cathara know it. They're playing dominant, but their bodies are telling a different story. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You're saying they're not actually as confident as they appear. I'm saying they're apex predators playing the only game they know. Dominance, territory, hierarchy, and they're very, very good at it. Then what do you propose we do about their request? We don't give them the processors. Sarah, we offer them something better. She pulled up another file. This one was a comparative analysis of atmospheric engineering approaches across 6 different species. The Cathara method was efficient, but required massive energy input. The collective's approach worked only for methane-heavy environments. Earth's nitrogen cycle converters sat in the middle, less efficient than Cathara systems, but requiring a fraction of the energy. Their terraforming projects are failing, Sarah said. Did you read the trade reports from last cycle? 3 of their colony worlds are experiencing atmospheric degradation. They're throwing energy at the problem, their standard approach, but it's not working fast enough. And you think they want our processors to solve that? I think they want our processors to copy and scale. They'll take our prototype, reverse engineer it, deploy it across their colonies, and we'll get a pat on the head and observer status in a committee that will never give us meaningful access. Marcus sat down. What's the alternative? We offer technical consultation, not the processes themselves, the methodology. We send a team to one of their struggling colonies and demonstrate the approach. If it works, we negotiate licensing rights, long-term, percentage-based. They'll never agree to that. Why not? They get a solution to their problem without giving us anything we could weaponize. Yes, we get revenue stream and proof that human technology has value. More importantly, Sarah leaned forward. We get to study how they operate, how their worlds work, their industrial base, their weak points. That sounds remarkably like intelligence gathering. That sounds remarkably like what every species in that Congress chamber is doing to every other species, all the time, wrapped in treaties and cultural exchange programs. Marcus studied her. When did you become this person? I spent 15 years watching animals lie to each other. Mimicry, camouflage, false signals. Every species plays deception games when survival is on the line. We're just doing it with treaties instead of coloration patterns. And you think this will work? I think if we roll over and give them what they want, they'll categorize us as prey and treat us accordingly for the next 1,000 years. But if we make them work for it, if we prove we understand the value of what we have... Sarah pulled up the menagerie data. Predators respect other predators. They avoid prey that fights back in unexpected ways. What if we're wrong? What if they just take offense and shut us out entirely? Then we were getting shut out anyway. And at least we didn't give away the one piece of technology that might have bought us real leverage later. Marcus stood, paced. The privacy field rippled with his movement. I'll need to get authorization from Earth. The Council won't like this. The Council sent us here to secure humanity's future, not to make friends. Those aren't mutually exclusive, aren't they? He stopped pacing. You really think we can play this game better than species who've been doing it for millennia? Sarah thought about persistence hunting, about humans who tracked prey for days, weeks, until the prey's body gave out from exhaustion. I think we can play it longer. The response came back from Earth after 2 days of consultation that Sarah imagined involved a lot of shouting in secured channels. The answer was, proceed with Dr. Ven's proposal, but maintain diplomatic flexibility. Which was bureaucratic language for, try your thing, but if it explodes, we'll blame you. Marcus drafted the counter-proposal. Sarah reviewed it 3 times, stripping out everything that sounded like apology or deference. When she was done, it read less like a negotiation and more like a business proposition between equals. And the Cathara delegation took 6 hours to respond. They wanted a meeting. The conference chamber was smaller than the main congressional hall, but somehow more intimidating. The walls were the same living material, currently displaying a neutral grey that the briefing materials translated as formal professional context. 4 Cathara sat on one side of the central table, Takar and 3 subordinates whose titles Sarah hadn't bothered to memorize. The Earth delegation took the opposite side. Marcus, Sarah, and Chenwei, their xenotechnology specialist who'd spent the last 2 days looking increasingly nervous. Takar spoke first. The translation came through with that unsettling lag. Your counter-proposal is unusual. We believe it addresses both parties' interests more effectively, Marcus said. His diplomatic voice was smooth. Too smooth. Sarah could hear the tension underneath. One of Takar's secondaries, smaller, with scales that shaded toward copper rather than bronze, leaned forward. You deny us direct access to your technology while requesting access to our colonial infrastructure. This suggests either admirable boldness or dangerous ignorance of standard protocol. Sarah watched the secondary's hand gestures. Rapid, angular, aggressive signaling. We're offering expertise, not product, she said. If I wanted to teach you how to hunt, I wouldn't give you my rifle. I'd show you how to track, how to read sign. The rifle's worthless if you don't know what you're hunting. The secondary's hands stopped moving. Takar's eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle pattern that gave him disconcerting depth perception, fixed on Sarah. You are the behavioral specialist. Xenobiology and animal behavior, yes. And you believe atmospheric processing is similar to hunting. I believe every technical problem has an ecological context. Your colonies are ecosystems, failing ecosystems. Our approach doesn't just process atmosphere, it integrates with existing biological cycles. That requires understanding the system, not just deploying technology. The Cathara understand systems. With respect, Ambassador, the fact that 3 of your colonies are experiencing cascading atmospheric failure suggests there's something in the system you're missing. The room temperature seemed to drop. The walls shifted toward a shade that might have been dark blue, or might have been the visual equivalent of a warning growl. Marcus's foot touched hers under the table. Gentle. Shut up now. But Takar's expression had changed. Not angry. Interested. You speak directly. I study behavior. I'm not good at pretending I don't see patterns. And what patterns do you see in this chamber? Sarah glanced at the secondaries, at their positioning, at the way they'd arranged themselves relative to Takar. Protective formation, but also something else. Control. They were managing him as much as supporting him. I see a delegation that's under pressure to deliver results, she said. Your atmospheric failures aren't just technical problems. They're political liabilities. The other core species are watching. If the Cathara can't maintain their colonies, their status as apex civilization comes into question. The copper-scaled secondary made a sound that the translator didn't even attempt to interpret. You are either remarkably perceptive, Takar said slowly, or you were briefed by someone with detailed knowledge of core politics. I was briefed by 17 years of watching baboons establish dominance hierarchies. Same principles, different scale. That got a reaction. The secondary's hands moved in rapid sequences. The walls flickered through 3 different colors. Takar himself remained perfectly still, which was its own kind of response. You compare the Cathara to primates, he said. I compare all intelligent species to their evolutionary ancestors, humans included. We're all just animals with better tools. And what animal are humans, Dr. Venn? She'd been waiting for this question. Pursuit predators. We're not fast, we're not strong, but we're patient, and we don't stop. Admirable traits in prey that has learned to bite back. We were never prey. We're just used to everything assuming we are. Takar's center eye dilated slightly. Your proposal. You offer technical consultation on one colony world. If successful, you claim licensing rights to the methodology. 20% of efficiency gains, calculated against baseline projections. 5-year initial term, renegotiable. Unacceptable. The Cathara do not share technological sovereignty. Then develop your own solution. We'll keep ours for Mars. Marcus actually flinched. Chen Wei looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. The copper-scaled secondary's hands moved so fast they blurred. Anger. Definite anger. But Takar raised one primary manipulator and the secondary stopped. You negotiate as though you have leverage, human. I negotiate as though we both have problems and one of us has a potential solution. That's not leverage. That's reality. And if we refuse your terms, then you keep trying to solve atmospheric degradation with brute force energy expenditure, and we keep developing Mars at our own pace. Both of us move forward, just not together. The silence that followed was the kind that makes diplomats age prematurely. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could see Marcus gripping the edge of the table hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. Takar's secondaries were having what looked like a silent argument, conducted entirely through hand gestures and subtle positioning shifts. Then Takar laughed. The sound was nothing like human laughter. It was sharp, percussive, like rocks breaking, but the translator labeled it clearly. Amusement, genuine. You are either the most foolish delegation we have encountered, he said, or the most dangerous. We have not determined which. Can't we be both? Sarah asked. Another rock-breaking sound. We will consider your proposal. But know this. If we agree to technical consultation, we will test your expertise thoroughly. The Cathara do not tolerate incompetence. The humans don't tolerate being underestimated. Takar stood. His secondaries rose with him, moving in that synchronized way that spoke of years working together. You will have our response within 2 cycles. The Cathara delegation left. As soon as the door sealed, Marcus turned to Sarah. That was the most terrifying negotiation I've ever witnessed. Did we get the deal? I have no idea. And you basically told the apex predators of the Corwood Reach that they were incompetent at ecosystem management. I told them they were missing something. There's a difference. Chen Wei was staring at her hands. I'm going to be sick. You're not going to be sick, Sarah said. You're going to start preparing technical briefings for every possible atmospheric failure scenario. Because if they accept, we're going to have to actually deliver. And if they don't accept, Marcus asked, then we proved we're not prey. That's worth something. Marcus's expression suggested he wasn't sure if it was worth potential exile from the Galactic Congress, but he didn't argue. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her too-short bed, staring at the ceiling that didn't quite look like a ceiling, and thought about predators. The thing about apex species is that they're not used to being challenged. They operate in environments where dominance is assumed and challenges are met with overwhelming force. But force only works if both parties are playing the same game. Humans had spent their evolutionary history being the thing that didn't play by normal rules. Too small to fight, too slow to run. So they'd developed different strategies: endurance, tools, pattern recognition, the ability to track something for days and remember exactly where it had been, where it was going, where it would have to stop eventually. Persistence. The Cathara thought in terms of territory and hierarchy. They'd built an empire on those principles, but empires had weaknesses that nomadic hunter-gatherers understood instinctively. Empires needed maintenance, resources, on constant reinforcement of dominance. Nomads just needed to keep moving. Her personal comm chimed. Soft, barely audible. She checked it. Message from Velshara. You performed well. They respect what they don't understand, for now. Sarah typed back, for now? The Cathara fear two things: weakness they can exploit, and strength they cannot categorize. You have shown them the second, but they will test it. Be ready. Ready for what? But Velshara had already signed off. Sarah lay back down. Outside her window, actual window, one of the few luxuries the delegation quarters offered, she could see a portion of the station's outer ring. Ships came and went in carefully orchestrated patterns, following traffic control protocols that managed thousands of vessels from hundreds of species, all of them following the rules, and all of them playing the game. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard something that might have been laughter or might have been the station's environmental systems cycling. Hard to tell. She thought about the animals in the menagerie, the way they'd recognized something in her that the Cathara hadn't seen yet. The prey animals knew. The predators were still learning. And learning, Sarah thought, as she finally drifted towards sleep, was a process that could take a very long time. Time humanity had in abundance. The Cathara accepted the proposal with conditions. Sarah read them in the delegation's morning briefing, standing because sitting made her restless, and restless made her think better. Marcus was already caffeinated and anxious, his default state since the negotiation. Chen Wei looked like she hadn't slept. They want us on Kethis 4, Marcus said. The most degraded of their failing colonies. If we can solve that one, they'll consider broader licensing agreements. And if we can't? Chen Wei asked. Then we've proven we're all talk, and Earth's credibility takes a hit that'll last decades. No pressure, Sarah murmured. They're also assigning us a Cathara technical liaison, someone named Vraktal, junior ecologist according to the file. Sarah pulled up the personnel data. Vraktal was young, at least by Cathara standards, with scales that hadn't fully bronzed yet. The briefing photo showed a Cathara who looked almost uncertain, which seemed wrong for a species that radiated confidence like heat. They're sending us someone inexperienced, she said. Maybe they're testing to see if we can work with minimal support. Or they're hoping we'll fail and want plausible deniability. Junior liaison, limited resources, impossible problem. When we crash and burn, they shrug and say they gave us a chance. Marcus set down his tablet. You're in a delightful mood this morning. I'm being realistic. You're being paranoid. I'm being a behavioral scientist. Predators don't offer prey opportunities out of generosity. They offer tests. This is a test. Then let's pass it. The transport to Kethis 4 took 11 days. Sarah spent most of it reviewing atmospheric data and trying not to think about the fact that she'd basically committed Earth to solving a problem that had stumped one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. The ship was Cathara designed, which meant everything was too large, and the gravity felt wrong. Chen Wei worked constantly, running simulations on portable equipment that looked primitive next to the ship's systems. Marcus practiced diplomatic speeches to empty corridors. Sarah watched. She watched how the Cathara crew moved through the ship, watched their interaction patterns, watched how they maintained hierarchy even in the relatively informal space of a transport vessel. They were efficient, precise, every action purposeful, but they never improvised. When a minor systems fluctuation occurred on day 5, nothing serious, just a cooling regulator cycling offline, the crew followed protocol exactly. Shut down the affected section, rerouted resources, ran diagnostics, fixed the problem, powered everything back up in precisely the order that the manual specified. It took 40 minutes. Sarah had worked on research stations where a cooling failure would have been solved in 10 minutes with duct tape, creative cursing, and whatever materials happened to be nearby. The Cathara didn't do creative solutions, they did correct solutions, which explained a lot about their atmospheric problem. Kethis 4 looked angry from orbit. The planet was supposed to be green. Sarah had seen the terraforming projections, the carefully planned biosphere, the target ecosystem that should have turned this ball of rock and water into something livable. Instead, it was a swirl of brown and sickly yellow, cloud patterns that moved in ways that suggested atmospheric instability. Oxygen concentration is down 14% from projected levels, Chen Wei said, reading from the ship's sensors. Nitrogen cycling has collapsed in the northern hemisphere. The indigenous microbial population is dying faster than the engineered species can replace it. Indigenous? Sarah asked. The planet had simple bacterial life before terraforming. The Cathara methodology involves suppressing native species and introducing engineered replicants. Should have worked. The models all said it would work. Sarah studied the planet. The models were wrong. They landed at the primary settlement, a domed city that housed maybe 30,000 Cathara and support species. The dome was emergency architecture, temporary, the kind of thing you build when your carefully planned outdoor colony starts trying to kill you. Vractal met them at the landing facility. He was young. Scales still held that greenish tint that apparently faded with age, and his posture was submissive, at least by Cathara standards, shoulders lowered, secondaries held close to his body. Dr. Ven, Diplomat Chen, Specialist Wei. He pronounced their names carefully, like he'd been practicing. Welcome to Kethis 4. I apologize for the environmental containment. We had hoped to show you a thriving colony. What we're seeing is more useful than what you hoped to show us, Sarah said. Vractal's head tilted. I do not understand. Success stories are boring. Failures tell you where the model breaks down. They walked through the dome settlement. The Cathara had built it to resemble their home world architecture, all curves and organic shapes, structures that looked grown rather than constructed. But everything felt wrong. Too contained, too controlled. And Sarah had visited enough failing ecosystems to recognize the smell of a system eating itself. Vractal led them to a research facility that probably violated several building codes. Equipment stacked on equipment, data terminals running overlapping analyses, Cathara scientists moving with the particular kind of frantic energy that comes from trying to solve a problem that's actively getting worse. We have been applying increased atmospheric processing, Vractal said. Additional energy input to force oxygen production. It works temporarily, but the effects degrade within weeks. Chen Wei was already at a data terminal, pulling up processing logs. You're outputting oxygen faster than the planetary system can integrate it. It's like force-feeding someone who's already sick. The models indicated this approach should stabilize the atmospheric composition. The models didn't account for the indigenous bacterial population fighting back, Sarah said. Every Cathara in the room stopped working, turned, stared. Fighting back? Vractal repeated. Sarah pulled up the microbial data. You suppressed the native bacteria, but you didn't eliminate it. It's still there, in the soil, in the water table, in the deep ocean vents. And it's adapting. Look at this. She highlighted a data cluster. Mutation rate in the native species has increased by orders of magnitude. They're evolving resistance to your engineered organisms. Bacteria do not fight back, one of the senior Cathara scientists said. His scales were full bronze, scarred. Old. They do not have intention. They don't need intention. They just need survival pressure and reproductive speed. You created the perfect environment for accelerated evolution. Constant chemical warfare, abundant resources for anything that can exploit the niche, and enough genetic diversity in the baseline population to experiment with solutions. Then we increase suppression measures, which will accelerate their evolution even more. You're in an arms race with organisms that reproduce every 20 minutes. How do you think that ends? Silence. Chen Wei looked up from her terminal. Dr. Ven is right. The more we suppress, the faster they adapt. We're selecting for resistance. Then what do you propose? Fractal asked. Sarah thought about ecosystems. About the delicate balance that human ecologists had learned to maintain on Earth through centuries of catastrophic failures. We stop fighting the indigenous bacteria and start negotiating with it. Negotiating. We create niches where it can thrive without disrupting the engineered species. Partition the ecosystem. Let the native bacteria dominate certain environments. Deep soil layers, specific mineral deposits, ocean vents. Create zones where your engineered species handle atmosphere processing, and other zones where native species maintain their own equilibrium. The senior scientist made a sound like gravel shifting. This is not how terraforming functions. We establish dominance over planetary systems. We do not compromise with bacteria. Then you keep losing colonies, Sarah said. Your choice. Vractal's secondaries were moving, rapid, agitated, but his voice stayed level. The human approach is unconventional. The human approach is based on learning the hard way that nature doesn't care about our plans. You work with the system, or the system works against you. And you believe this will work on Kethis 4. I believe it's your only option besides abandoning the colony entirely. More silence. Sarah could feel the weight of Cathara attention, could see them reassessing, recalculating, trying to fit this approach into their framework for how planetary engineering should function. We will need to run simulations, Vractal said finally. Run them. We'll start mapping viable partition zones. The work took weeks. Sarah spent most of it in an environment suit and collecting samples from zones outside the dome. The Cathara came with her, initially as supervision, gradually as something closer to collaboration. Vractal was curious in ways that the older scientists weren't. He asked questions, wanted to understand the reasoning, not just the process. Why do humans study animal behavior? He asked one day. They were in what used to be a forest zone, dead trees standing like monuments to ecological failure. Because we used to be animals, Sarah said. Still are, really. Understanding behavior helps us understand ourselves. The Cathara evolved past such concerns. Did you? You still maintain dominance hierarchies, still signal territory, still respond to threat displays. Vractal's scales rippled. Discomfort. That is different. We are civilized. Civilization is just the game we play on top of the instincts. The instincts are still there. She collected a soil sample. The native bacteria here were thriving, probably because the engineered species had died off completely, leaving an ecological vacuum. Your approach to this problem is very different from ours, Vractal said. We come from different evolutionary pressures. Cathara developed as apex predators. You learned to dominate environments. Humans developed as persistence hunters. We learned to adapt to environments we couldn't dominate. And you believe adaptation is superior to dominance. I believe they're tools. Sometimes you need a hammer. Sometimes you need to be water and flow around the obstacle. Vractal's head tilted in that way that suggested he was accessing cultural database references. Human philosophy contains many water metaphors. We're mostly water ourselves. Makes sense we'd identify with it. They collected samples in silence for a while. Sarah watched Vrachtal work. He was methodical, precise, but there was something else there too. Curiosity, the willingness to question, rare traits in a species that had built an empire on certainty. "Dr. Venn," he said eventually, "why did you accept this assignment? Your status in the Galactic Congress is peripheral. You had nothing to gain and much to lose." "We had everything to gain. Credibility. Proof that human expertise has value. A chance to be seen as something other than newcomers who got lucky with faster-than-light physics. But the risk? The risk was there anyway. If we played it safe, we'd be prey animals forever. At least this way, we're prey animals with teeth." Vrachtal's scales shifted through several shades. Processing. The other species, they see humans as weak, physically unimpressive. Your diplomatic posture has been submissive. Has it? Ambassador Chen maintains careful deference. He signals non-threat constantly. That's Marcus's job. Mine is different. What is your job? Sarah sealed the sample container. To make sure everyone remembers we're predators, not prey. We just hunt on different timescales. The simulation results came back after Chen Wei spent 72 hours running models that made the Cathara computers struggle. The senior scientists reviewed them with expressions that Sarah had learned to read as grudging acceptance. "The partition approach shows promise," the lead scientist admitted. "If implemented correctly, atmospheric stability should improve within 6 months. Assuming the native bacteria cooperate," another scientist added. "They'll cooperate," Sarah said, "because we're giving them what they want. Space to exist without constant assault. It's not cooperation, it's mutual non-interference. The Cathara do not practice mutual non-interference. Then maybe that's why your colonies are failing." The scientist's scales darkened. Anger. But Vrachtal stepped forward. Secondaries raised in a gesture that Sarah had learned meant, "I speak for the group." "Dr. Venn's approach is unconventional," he said, "but the data supports the hypothesis. I recommend we proceed with implementation." "You are junior staff," the lead scientist said. "I am the designated liaison. This is my assessment." The room held its breath. A dominance challenge, subtle but clear. The younger Cathara pushing back against the older, unprecedented from what Sarah had observed. The lead scientist's secondaries moved through complex patterns, then stopped. "Proceed, but if this fails, the responsibility is yours." "Understood." After the senior scientists left, Sarah turned to Vrachtal. "That was brave. That was necessary. My people are failing because we refuse to adapt. Someone must demonstrate that adaptation is possible, even if it costs you status. Even then." Sarah studied him, saw something she recognized, the willingness to challenge established patterns because the patterns were broken, the curiosity that came before innovation, the thing that apex predators rarely developed because dominance was easier than learning. "You're going to have a difficult career," she said. "Likely, but I will have a career on a living planet, not a failed colony." They started implementation the next day. Partition zones, carefully managed boundaries, the human approach to ecosystem management applied to an alien world. It was messy, imprecise, nothing like the Cathara's usual methodology. And within 3 weeks, the atmospheric readings started to improve. The atmospheric recovery on Kethis 4 became impossible to hide after 6 months. Oxygen levels stabilized. The engineered and native bacteria reached something resembling equilibrium. Not cooperation, just mutual tolerance in carefully maintained zones. The brown and yellow atmospheric swirl started showing patches of green. Not everywhere, not perfect, but alive, living. Sarah watched the data feeds from the delegation quarters back on the Congress station and tried not to think about how many ways this could still collapse. Ecosystems were fragile during transition periods. One invasive species, one unexpected chemical cascade, one population boom in the wrong niche, and the whole carefully balanced structure could crash. But the Cathara scientists on Kethis 4 were sending reports. Careful, precise, grudgingly optimistic. It was working. Earth is demanding updates, Marcus said. He looked healthier than he had in months. Less grey. More like a diplomat who might actually be negotiating from a position that wasn't complete weakness. The Council wants to know when we can expect formal acknowledgement from the Cathara. When the Cathara decide they're ready to admit that prey animals solved their problem. You really need to stop calling us that. I'll stop when everyone else stops thinking it. Chen Wei appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, expression somewhere between excited and terrified. We have a problem. Sarah's stomach dropped. The ecosystem crashed. No, the ecosystem is fine. Better than fine. The Cathara want to apply our methodology to their other failing colonies. All of them. That's not a problem, so that's success. They want exclusive rights, complete technology transfer, no licensing fees. There it was. Sarah stood. They want us to hand over everything we learned, give them permission to apply it galaxy-wide, and get nothing in return. They're calling it equitable knowledge sharing for the betterment of established civilizations. Chen Wei's tone suggested she'd memorized the exact phrasing from sheer disbelief. They're framing it as us doing our part for the galactic community. Marcus was already pulling up communications protocols. I'll draft a response, polite but firm. We have contractual agreements. No, Sarah said. They both looked at her. We don't negotiate, we demonstrate. Demonstrate what? That prey animals have very good memory. And we don't forget when predators try to steal our kills. The congressional session was packed. Word had spread. The peripheral human delegation had somehow solved a Cathara ecological crisis, and now everyone wanted to see what happened next. Sarah stood in the human alcove, watching the chamber fill. The Cathara delegation entered with their usual precision, scales polished, movements coordinated. Takar took his position at the primary speaking platform. But Vraktal was with them now, no longer junior liaison to a failing colony. Newly appointed to the Homeworld Ecological Advisory Council. His scales had darkened slightly. Maturation, stress, or both. When he entered the chamber, he looked directly at Sarah, held her gaze for 3 seconds, then took his position with the Cathara delegation. Message received. The session began with standard procedures. Trade agreements, territorial disputes, resource allocation debates that Sarah had learned to recognize as thinly veiled threats wrapped in diplomatic language. Then Takar rose to speak. The Kethis 4 atmospheric crisis has been resolved through collaborative effort with the human delegation. The Cathara acknowledged this contribution. The chamber reacted. Subtle shifts in posture. Delegates leaning forward. The walls flickering through colors that suggested surprise and curiosity in equal measure. However, Takar continued, the success of this intervention raises questions of equity and resource distribution. The methodology employed represents significant value to multiple civilizations facing similar challenges. The Cathara propose that such knowledge be shared freely among Congress members, consistent with our principles of collective advancement. Translation: we want it for free, and we're dressing it up as principle. Marcus tensed beside Sarah, started to rise. She put a hand on his arm. Wait, Sarah? Trust me. The Methane Collective responded first. Their speaker, a vapor formation that coalesced into vaguely humanoid shape, addressed the chamber through chemical signals that the translation matrix rendered as precise, clipped sentences. The collective supports equitable distribution. However, we note that the Cathara did not freely share their wormhole navigation protocols. Equity implies reciprocity. Several delegations signaled agreement. Not support for humanity. Sarah wasn't naive enough to think that. But resistance to the Cathara claiming special privilege. The harmonics spoke next, their crystalline bodies chiming in frequencies that made the translation matrix struggle. We question the premise that knowledge should be free. The humans invested resources, assumed risk, success demands recognition. More agreement, Louder this time. Takar's secondaries were moving rapidly. Defensive patterns. He hadn't expected opposition. Sarah rose. The chamber noise decreased. Not silence. Peripheral species didn't command silence. But attention. That was new. "If I may address the Congress," she said. Marcus grabbed her wrist, whispered, "You don't have speaking privileges. I'm about to get them." Takar's center eye focused on her. "The human delegation does not have floor access." "Then grant me petitioner's speech. 2 minutes. Congress protocol allows it." He could refuse. Probably should refuse. But the chamber was watching, and refusing would look like the Cathara were afraid of what a peripheral species might say. 2 minutes, Takar said. "Speak." Sarah stepped forward. Every delegation in the chamber tracked her movement. She could feel the weight of evaluation, categorization, prey or predator, threat or irrelevance. Time to answer that question. "The Cathara are right," she said. "Knowledge should be shared. So let me share what we learned on Kethis 4. Confused reactions rippled through the chamber. We learned that dominance-based terraforming fails when you encounter systems that refuse to be dominated. We learned that forcing compliance from planetary ecosystems creates more problems than it solves. We learned that adaptation beats subjugation when you're playing a long enough game. She paused. Let it land. But more importantly, we learned something about the species gathered in this chamber. You're all playing the wrong game. Takar's scales darkened. Explain. You compete for territory, resources, status. You signal dominance and establish hierarchy and treat the galaxy like it's one big ecosystem where the apex predators divide the prey. But that's not how ecology actually works. Real ecosystems have niches, specialists, species that survive not by being strongest, but by being patient enough to outlast the predators. Human philosophy, one of the Cathara secondaries muttered. Human experience. We spent our evolutionary history being the thing that got hunted. Everything on our planet was bigger, faster, stronger. But we're still here. Want to know why? The chamber was dead silent now. Because we learned to track, to plan, to remember. We learned that you don't have to win the sprint if you can run the marathon. We learned that predators get tired, get sloppy, get overconfident. And we learned that the thing you dismiss as prey might be the thing that follows you across continents until your heart gives out from running. Sarah turned slowly, making eye contact with as many delegations as she could. You want our methodology? Fine, here it is. Stop trying to dominate systems you don't understand. Start learning to adapt. Accept that the galaxy doesn't care about your hierarchy, and the only thing that matters is whether you're still standing when the ecosystem shifts. This is insult, Takar said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. This is reality. You asked us to solve your problem because your approach failed. We solved it by doing what humans do best. We adapted. We compromised. We worked with the system instead of against it. Those are our strengths. That's what we bring to this Congress. She stepped back. You want our knowledge for free? Then acknowledge that it has value. Give Earth full voting status, treaty negotiation rights, access to the resource committees, not petitioner status, full membership. The chamber erupted. Delegations signaling to each other. The walls cycling through colors so rapidly they became a blur. The methane collective releasing gas in patterns that probably constituted either approval or fury. Hard to tell. But Marcus was staring at her like she'd just declared war on the entire Galactic Congress. Takar's secondaries were having a visible argument, hands moving so fast they were nearly invisible. Then Velshara rose from the Quelon delegation. Their small form barely visible from most of the chamber, but their voice carried. The Quelon support the human petition. They have demonstrated value. They have proven adaptability. These qualities merit recognition. The collective agrees, the methane spokesperson added. Innovation deserves status. One by one, delegations signaled support. Not all of them. Not even half. But enough. The Cathara secondaries stopped moving. Takar stood perfectly still, the Cathara equivalent of shock. Finally, he spoke. "This is unprecedented." "Good," Sarah said. We're good at unprecedented." "The Cathara delegation will need to consult with the Home World Council. This decision has implications. Take your time. We're very patient." Takar's center eye dilated. For the first time since Sarah had met him, she saw something that might have been respect or fear. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. The session adjourned in chaos. Delegations clustering in groups, debating, arguing, signaling frantically. The Cathara left first. Protocol demanded it. But their formation was disrupted. Uncertain. Marcus pulled Sarah aside as soon as they reached the delegation quarters. That was the most audacious, reckless, brilliant piece of diplomacy I've ever witnessed. "You sound confused." "I am confused. I've spent 40 years learning to navigate these systems with careful deference. Isn't you just walked in and demanded status like you were ordering coffee? I demanded status because we earned it. There's a difference between deference and submission." Chen Wei was pulling up communication channels. "Earth is going to lose their minds. Sarah, we just changed the entire structure of Congress petition protocols." "Did we get votes yet?" "No, but Takar didn't refuse outright. He called for consultation. That's not a no." "Then we wait. For how long?" "As long as it takes." The answer came 3 days later. Sarah was in the menagerie when her comm chimed. She'd been visiting regularly. The animals recognized her now, responded to her presence with that same deference they'd shown the first time. Still strange, still humbling. The message was from Takar. "The Cathara Homeworld Council has reviewed the human petition. We will support conditional advancement to full Congress status. Details to be negotiated. Your methodology will be licensed under agreed terms. We acknowledge human expertise in adaptive systems management." Below that, a personal note from Vraktal. "You were right. Adaptation beats dominance. Some of us are learning. Thank you for teaching." Sarah sat on the same bench where Velshara had found her weeks ago. The artificial sunset was turning the habitat ceiling gold and purple again. She thought about persistence hunting, about the long chase, about humans who had learned that you don't need to be the strongest predator if you're willing to be the most patient one. A small creature emerged from the underbrush. Rabbit-sized, 6 legs. The same one she'd seen on her first visit, maybe. Hard to tell. It approached slowly, cautious, but not afraid. When it reached her, it pressed its head against her hand. Sarah scratched behind its ears, all 3 of them. "You knew," she said softly. "Didn't you? You knew before they did." The creature made a soft sound, contentment. Somewhere in the forest, something larger moved through the trees. The apex predator she'd encountered before. It paused at the tree line, watched her, then lowered its head, just slightly. Recognition. Sarah stood. The rabbit creature scurried back to safety. The predator melted back into the forest. The ecosystem balanced itself. The formal acknowledgement came at the next congressional session, where Earth's delegation was moved from the peripheral alcove to a position in the secondary ring, not quite core status, but light years ahead of where they'd started. When Takar made the announcement, his voice carried none of its usual dominant certainty. He sounded almost careful. The human delegation has demonstrated unique expertise in adaptive methodology. They have proven their value to the Congress. Therefore, the Cathara support their advancement to full member status with voting rights in ecological and resource management committees. Additional committee access to be determined through negotiation. The chamber reacted with that same surprised energy as before. But this time, there were signals of approval. Acceptance. Marcus was actually smiling. Chen Wei looked like she might cry. Sarah watched the Cathara delegation, watched Takar's secondaries, watched Vraktal, who was watching her. The young Cathara raised one primary manipulator. A gesture that wasn't in any of the cultural briefing materials Sarah had read. But she understood it anyway. Respect. She returned the gesture. After the session, Velshara found her in the corridor. "You changed the game," the Quellan said. "I just played the one we're actually in. The Cathara will never see humans the same way again." "Good. I'm tired of being underestimated." Velshara's feathers ruffled. Amusement. "You realize this is only the beginning. Now you have to maintain that status. Prove it wasn't a fluke. We've been proving ourselves for 300,000 years. We're good at it. Against other humans. This is different." "Is it? Competition is competition." Well, politics is just group dynamics with fancier language. And humans wrote the book on outlasting things that should have killed us. "What book is that?" Sarah smiled. "All of them. We're persistence predators. We write long books because we think in long time frames. The Cathara might dominate the next century. But we'll be here for the next 10,000 years, adapting, learning, outlasting. And if they try to suppress you, then they'll learn what the prey animals already know. That the thing you dismiss as weak might be the thing that's still standing when you collapse from exhaustion." Velshara made that wind-through-grass sound. "I look forward to watching this unfold." "We look forward to unfolding it." The Quellan departed, 6 limbs carrying them toward their own delegation's quarters. Sarah stood alone in the corridor, listening to the station's ambient sounds. Thousands of species, millions of beings, all playing the game of galactic politics, all learning that humanity had just changed the rules. Not by being stronger, not by being faster, not by being more technologically advanced, by being exactly what they'd always been. Persistent, adaptive, patient, apex predators who'd learned to hunt on timescales that other species couldn't even comprehend. The prey animals had known from the beginning. The predators were finally catching up, and the long chase, the one that would define humanity's place in the galaxy, had only just begun. Sarah walked back to the delegation quarters, thinking about marathons and ecological niches and the particular kind of dominance that comes from refusing to quit. Somewhere in the menagerie, animals settled into their evening routines. Prey and predator alike, each occupying their space in the ecosystem, each knowing their place. But knowing, Sarah had learned, was just the beginning. Understanding took time. And time was the one resource humanity had learned to weaponize better than anyone else. She smiled. Let the galaxy learn. They had nothing but time.